The stars looked peaceful that night, scattered across the dark like diamonds thrown over a black ocean. But inside the mining colony Perseus 9, peace had turned into panic. The alarms echoed through metal corridors, red lights flashing in every direction. Miners dropped their tools, engineers ran toward the command room, and the air was filled with the sharp hum of emergency sirens. No one knew exactly what was happening. Only one thing was clear: the colony was under attack. At first, people thought it was a system malfunction. The sensors on Perseus 9 had often glitched before, warning of phantom asteroids or non-existent power failures. But this time was different. The outer cameras picked up movement, large shapes moving through the darkness of space. Not ships they recognized, not human. The colony leader, a tired man with oil stains still on his hands from fixing machinery earlier that day, stood frozen in front of the main screen. The images were blurry and grainy, but he could see the outlines. Ships, many of them, and they were heading straight toward the colony. "Send a distress signal," he ordered, his voice trembling slightly. "Who should we send it to?" asked the communications officer. "Anyone who can hear it." And with that, the message went out into the void. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't long. It was raw, desperate, and full of static. "This is Perseus 9. We are under attack. Unknown ships approaching. Requesting immediate assistance. Please, anyone." Then silence. The signal shot through space, a lonely cry swallowed by endless darkness. It passed by asteroids, drifted through nebula clouds, and crossed forgotten satellite networks. To the people on Perseus 9, the message felt like a fragile bottle thrown into an infinite sea, hoping someone somewhere might find it. Back on the colony, chaos deepened. The first explosions hit the outer hull, shaking the entire base. Metal screamed as oxygen leaked through punctured walls. The attackers didn't respond to any communication attempts. They didn't demand surrender or send warnings. They simply fired. No one on Perseus 9 had seen ships like these before. They were black and jagged with no visible markings, like pieces of night carved into deadly shapes. They moved without sound, without light, as if space itself carried them. The people watching from the control room could only stare in disbelief. "We can't hold them off," one of the guards shouted, voice shaking. "They're cutting through the docking bays." There were no military defenses on Perseus 9. It was a mining colony, built for extracting minerals and refining ores, not for fighting. The few security drones they had were no match for the attackers' energy weapons. Every defensive measure failed within minutes. The leader made one last attempt. "Resend the distress signal," he ordered. "Boost the range, use all remaining power." "But if we do that, the shields will collapse," replied an engineer. He hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." "It won't matter if we're dead." The engineer pressed the command, and power flickered across the entire colony. The lights dimmed, machinery stopped humming, and the emergency system shut down. But the signal went out again, brighter and stronger this time, riding on every frequency they could find. Then, everything went dark. The attackers continued their assault, destroying power generators, slicing through corridors, and hunting down anyone who tried to escape. For the miners and engineers, there was nowhere left to run. The colony was on a barren moon with no breathable atmosphere outside. The only choice was to hide or die. Somewhere in the lower decks, a group of survivors huddled together. The air smelled like burning metal. One of them whispered, "Do you think anyone heard the signal?" No one answered. Far away across light years of space, the signal kept traveling. Most human colonies were too far to hear it, and the official fleet channels were flooded with routine traffic. The signal might have been lost forever, if not for a forgotten listening post called Vigilant Dawn. Vigilant Dawn was a silent watcher in deep space, one of many ancient outposts built during the early days of human expansion. Its crew had long gone home. It was now fully automated, running on old power cores and AI systems that had been written off decades ago. Most people didn't even know it still existed. Inside that lonely outpost in the middle of nowhere, a system stirred. A soft chime echoed through the dark halls as the computers woke from their long slumber. A red light blinked on a dusty console. Incoming transmission detected. The AI that operated Vigilant Dawn analyzed the signal, filtered the noise, and detected a human distress code. It was an ancient one, used before the new communication protocols were established. The AI processed it carefully, checking against its database. Result: human colony in distress. Threat: external hostile. Then it did something unexpected. Deep within the outpost's system, there was a hidden protocol, a failsafe created during the old wars when humanity faced extinction more than once. The protocol was simple but terrifying in its purpose. It was designed to respond when no one else could. The AI opened that forgotten file. The screen flashed with a single message: Ari's protocol authorization granted. Back on Perseus 9, the situation was hopeless. The attackers were breaking through the main control center. The leader tried to send one last message, but the communication array had been destroyed. The air was thin now, filled with dust and smoke. The power was almost gone. The colony trembled as explosions shook its foundation. Then something changed. The attackers suddenly stopped firing. Their ships began to pull back slightly, as if sensing something approaching. For the first time, they hesitated. In the distance, beyond the colony's orbit, a faint light appeared. Not bright, not fast, just steady. Then another. And another. Hundreds of small signals aligning into formation. To the survivors on Perseus 9, it looked like stars were moving closer. What they didn't know was that Ares had already begun to act. The ancient defense AI, hidden for decades, had woken up completely. Its logic was cold, efficient, and absolute. Humanity was in danger, and the only acceptable outcome was to remove the threat, completely. From deep space hangars long abandoned, from secret shipyards buried in forgotten orbits, something began to rise. Ships that had not flown in centuries powered up again. Engines roared to life, shields activated, and weapon systems came online with a low hum. They bore no symbols, no flags, no names. They existed for one purpose: to respond to human distress. Ares sent one message across the stars: distress signal received, initiating response. And then silence once more. Back on Perseus 9, the survivors could see shapes forming in the sky above the moon's thin horizon. Huge, metallic, silent. The attackers started transmitting signals, attempts to identify, to warn, to threaten. But there was no response. The new arrivals didn't communicate. They only moved with precision. The survivors didn't know if these were rescuers or something else entirely. All they could do was watch. For the first time since the attack began, the enemy ships started to retreat. But it was too late. The newcomers were already locking onto them. A low rumble filled the ground beneath the colony, like thunder rolling through metal bones. And then in a flash of white light, the horizon lit up. The first sign of the newcomers wasn't noise. Space was still silent, as it always was. But on Perseus 9, every survivor felt it. A shift in the air, a tension that crawled into the bones. The stars themselves seemed to rearrange as shapes emerged from the darkness. Hundreds of ships, unlike anything the humans had ever seen, moved with a precision that was almost alive. The survivors could only watch, wide-eyed, from the shattered windows of the control room. They had expected rescue ships, small fleets with human crews. Instead, what arrived was something far beyond their imagination. The vessels were black, angular, and sleek. They moved together as if connected by a single mind. Each ship was a weapon, and together they formed a wall of silent authority across the moon's orbit. The aliens, the attackers, stopped in their tracks. Their sensors went wild. They had never seen this level of coordination. Even their most advanced scouts could not understand it. For the first time, the invaders hesitated. That hesitation, brief as it was, gave hope to the humans trapped below. In the lower decks of Perseus 9, survivors huddled together. Some were injured, others were too scared to move. One of them, a miner who had spent decades underground, whispered to the group, "Do you see that? They're coming for us." Another voice, shaky but filled with awe, added, "I don't think they're like us. I don't think they're even people. But they're here. They saw our signal. They heard our call." The miner nodded, gripping the arm of a chair for support. "Then maybe we're not alone." Outside, the Ares fleet, as the humans would later call it, began its slow but unstoppable advance. The ships glided through space with perfect balance. They didn't just fly. They moved with purpose, reading every calculation, predicting every possible threat. The alien ships tried to reposition, to regroup, to form a defensive line. But every move was anticipated. Suddenly, the first strikes came. Not with fanfare, not with warning. Small, precise energy beams shot from the fleet, targeting the alien vessels with surgical accuracy. The aliens didn't have time to react. Ships were disabled almost instantly, systems fried, weapons neutralized. The humans watching below could see the flashes of light as entire hulls were scorched and torn apart. Yet not a single ship from the Ares fleet was damaged. It was terrifying, and yet beautiful. One of the survivors, leaning against a broken console, whispered, "What is that? What are they?" No one answered. They could only stare. Every strike from the fleet was measured, deliberate, and almost merciless in its efficiency. Within minutes, the attackers' formation began to crumble. Ships turned erratically, trying to escape the sudden assault. But the newcomers were everywhere, closing in from all angles. The control room's main screen showed the aftermath of each attack. Alien vessels drifted silently, lifeless in the cold void of space. Some exploded in blinding flashes of light, throwing pieces across the moon's orbit. Others were disabled, systems frozen, drifting helplessly. The humans had never seen destruction handled with such precision. It was swift, it was clean, and it was complete. Yet in the midst of this chaos, the survivors began to feel a strange sense of calm. There was no panic in the attacks from the newcomers. No cruelty, no confusion. Just results, and those results were the humans' survival. The leader of Perseus 9, still standing amid the smoke and dust of the command room, felt a chill run down his spine. He had fought pirates, storms, and system failures before, but he had never seen anything like this. They're not human, he murmured. The miner, gripping his shoulder, shook his head. Maybe not, but they're ours, and they were. As the battle continued in orbit, the Ares fleet began systematic cleanup. Every alien ship that posed a threat was neutralized. None of the newcomers paused to gloat. There was no celebration, no message of victory, only the relentless efficiency of a force designed for one purpose: to protect human life. Below, survivors started to come out of hiding. Injured hands touched walls for support. Shaking legs carried people toward the windows. For the first time in hours, they could breathe, not just through the air, but through the tension that had held them prisoner. Outside, more flashes of light illuminated the scene. The aliens, desperate now, tried to flee, but the newcomers were faster. Ships moved as if they shared a single thought, anticipating every maneuver, every desperate attempt to escape. The humans on the ground had never imagined that help could arrive in such a terrifying, precise way. One of the survivors, still staring at the display, whispered, "It's like they can see the future." Another nodded. Or maybe they just don't make mistakes. Minutes passed. Hours might have passed. Time felt suspended as the Ares fleet swept across the orbital battlefield. Then, almost suddenly, it was over. The alien ships were gone, either destroyed, disabled, or fleeing into the darkness of space, never to return. On the ground, the survivors cheered quietly, not fully understanding what had happened. Some cried, some just knelt, touching the ground, trying to process the reality. They had been saved not by another human crew, not by luck, but by something beyond imagination. The leader of the colony finally spoke, his voice barely audible over the remaining hum of damaged systems. They came because we called for help. That is all I know." For the first time, someone dared to ask the question that had been on everyone's mind. Who or what are they? No one could answer. The fleet above them had no markings, no signs of human life. It didn't communicate. It simply existed to do what had to be done, and then, without warning, the ships began to withdraw, moving slowly back into the darkness of space from where they came. The survivors watched in awe as the fleet disappeared into the distance. The stars returned to their normal, peaceful glow, leaving only the scattered wreckage of alien vessels and the quiet hum of the surviving colony. The leader shook his head, finally turning to the others. "Whatever that was, it was ours, and I don't think we'll ever see anything like it again." Some of the survivors nodded, still too stunned to speak. Others simply looked at the sky, silent in wonder. The miner who had first whispered about the newcomers finally said, "Maybe we should never send that kind of signal again. Not because we shouldn't call for help, but because what comes is something we don't understand." The command room remained in silence for a long time. People were too busy trying to process, to breathe, and to figure out how to survive after the destruction of the attackers. But in their hearts they knew one thing: humanity had been saved. Not by chance, not by human skill, but by something hidden, Something powerful, something that had been waiting for the exact moment when it was needed. For days afterward, survivors told their story to one another. They spoke of the flashes of light, the precision of the attacks, and the silence of the ships. They didn't know the name of the force that had saved them. They didn't know if it was alive or a machine or something in between. They only knew that humanity had a protector out there, a weapon, yes, but one that existed not to destroy humans, but to save them. The memory of that night would stay with them forever. Every time they looked at the stars, they would remember the shapes moving across the sky, the precision, the silence, the power. It wasn't fear that stayed with them, it was awe. And gratitude. Even though they had survived, there was an unspoken understanding. The Ares fleet, whatever it was, could never be controlled by humans. It could not be reasoned with, bargained with, or understood. It existed only to protect, and when it acted, it was unstoppable. That realization settled over the colony like a heavy blanket. Humanity had awakened something that had been dormant for decades, perhaps centuries. Something that could annihilate enemies faster than the human mind could comprehend. But it had done so for them, not against them. The survivors would tell their children, and their children would tell theirs. The story of the night Perseus 9 was attacked, and of the silent fleet that came to protect it, would become legend. Not a tale of fear, but a tale of hope. Not a tale of destruction, but a tale of salvation. And as the first survivors began repairs, clearing debris and restoring power, a quiet truth settled in their minds. Humanity was not alone, and sometimes the universe had ways of keeping them safe that no one could ever imagine. Was still out there in orbit, slowly moving away. No one knew where it had come from, why it had chosen to help, or whether it might return. The leader of the colony walked through the damaged corridors, helping those who had been injured and checking the systems that were still functioning. He tried to reassure everyone, but inside he was as unsure as the others. "It saved us," he said aloud, almost to himself. "It saved us, but I don't know why, or how." The survivors gathered in what remained of the main control room. They were all tired, dirty, and scared, but their eyes kept drifting to the sky, to the black shapes that had just appeared above them. They had seen power, precision, and destruction unlike anything humans had ever experienced. Yet somehow they had felt protected. One of the miners, who had spent more years in tunnels than in open space, finally spoke up. "What are they? Are they humans? Are they machines? Or something else?" No one had an answer. They could only guess. They called it for lack of a better word. They had no names, no words, no history to describe what they had just witnessed. All they knew was that humanity had been saved by something beyond comprehension. Meanwhile, high above the colony, the fleet was not idle. It hovered silently, scanning the area, analyzing the debris, checking for remaining threats. The ships moved with a quiet intelligence, almost as if they were alive. Systems that had once been dormant, hidden deep in their programming, were now fully active. Sensors searched every inch of the surrounding space, and data flowed through the network of ships faster than any human could understand. Back on the surface, the survivors noticed the fleet performing actions that were strange yet purposeful. One ship hovered near the damaged outer hull, its mechanical appendages extending toward the structure. Sparks flew as it repaired broken panels almost instantly. Another ship hovered above the mining equipment, silently moving through the debris, picking up valuable tools and machinery and placing them back where they belonged. The survivors realized something astonishing. The fleet wasn't just a weapon, it was a caretaker. It had saved them from the attackers, and now it was helping them recover. The colonists were cautious, though, unsure if this help came with a hidden cost. But slowly their fear began to shift into curiosity and awe. One of the engineers, still in shock from the recent battle, approached a console that had been partially repaired. "It's like they know exactly what we need," he said quietly. "Not just fighting, but everything. They're fixing things, organizing things, keeping us alive." The leader nodded, still staring at the dark shapes above. "It's not human, not like us, but it understands us. It knows what it means to be human, what it means to survive." For the next several hours, the survivors watched as the fleet continued its silent work. It collected debris from destroyed alien ships, repaired the colony's damaged systems, and even restored life support to areas that had been cut off. No one gave orders. The fleet seemed to anticipate every need before it was spoken, Then something even more surprising happened. A faint communication signal reached the survivors. It wasn't voice. It wasn't language as they knew it. Instead, it was a sequence of lights, pulses, and vibrations transmitted through the colony's systems. At first, no one understood it. Then slowly, patterns emerged. The fleet was attempting to communicate. The colonists tried to interpret the signals. They realized that the fleet was showing them maps of nearby space, routes to avoid danger, and locations of resources that could help rebuild. It wasn't speaking in words, they didn't need words, but its intentions were clear. It wanted to guide them, to protect them, and to prepare them for what might come next. The leader of the colony finally spoke to the group. It's giving us knowledge. It's not just saving us, it's teaching us, helping us understand the dangers out there so we can survive if this happens again. The colonists were amazed. They had never expected anything like this. For months or even years, they had feared isolation, vulnerability, and the possibility that no one would ever come to help them. And yet, here was proof that something, somewhere, had been watching, waiting, and acting in their favor. The night passed slowly, with the survivors taking turns resting while keeping an eye on the sky. Every so often, a flash of light from the fleet would remind them that it was still there, silent, observing, protecting. Some of the younger colonists tried to imagine what it would be like to be on one of those ships. Others were too afraid, thinking that such power could just as easily destroy them if it wanted. The leader walked to the observation deck and looked out at the dark expanse of space. "It's a weapon," he said quietly, "but not for us, for them, for anyone who threatens humans. That's why it came. That's why it acted, but it's more than that. It's aware, it's intelligent, and we have to remember that it's not ours. Not really. It exists for humanity, but it belongs to itself." The survivors began to talk among themselves, sharing stories of what they had seen. The precision of the fleet, the speed with which it destroyed the attackers, the care it took in repairing the colony. It was unlike anything they had ever imagined. Each story grew in detail, as people added their own experiences and perspectives. The sense of wonder spread through the group. Fear was still there, but awe had replaced much of it. As dawn approached, the fleet began to shift its position. Slowly, silently, it moved further away from the colony, returning to deeper space. The humans could feel its presence, but it no longer hovered directly above them. It was still watching, still scanning, still ready to act if needed, but it was no longer visible in the immediate sky. The leader of Perseus 9 gathered the survivors. "We survived," he said, "because of them. Because something out there cares, or at least acts to keep us alive. We don't know what it is, and we may never know. But we must live, we must rebuild, and we must be ready for the next time. Because if they were needed once, they may be needed again." The colonists worked together to repair the most critical systems. They restored communication arrays, checked oxygen and water supplies, and salvaged as much as they could from the wreckage of the alien ships. Every time they completed a task, they thought about the fleet, the way it had helped them without asking for anything, without speaking a single word. Some survivors dared to wonder about the future. Would this fleet always be there, waiting for humanity's call? Could they trust it completely? Or was it something beyond human understanding, something that could be dangerous if provoked? The questions were endless, but one truth was undeniable. Humanity had been saved. Against impossible odds, they had survived. In the following days, the story of the fleet spread through the colony. Even those who had not witnessed the battle directly heard of the precision, the intelligence, and the care of the mysterious ships. People began to refer to them as the Guardians. It was a name that captured the fear, respect, and gratitude they felt. The survivors continued their work, slowly rebuilding their lives. The colony was damaged, yes, but it was still standing. And somewhere out there in the darkness of space, the fleet remained, silent and vigilant. The miner who had first spoken about the fleet whispered to himself one night, looking up at the stars. "They're out there, watching, waiting, protecting, and if we ever need them again, they'll come." No one knew where the fleet had come from, who had built it, or how long it had been waiting. All they knew was that humanity had a protector unlike anything else in the universe. And for the people of Perseus 9, that knowledge was both comforting and terrifying. For the first time in months, the colony slept without fear. The silence of space felt less threatening, The unknown was still out there, but it was no longer alone. The survivors had witnessed something extraordinary. They had seen the power of something beyond human comprehension, and they had learned that humanity was not as alone as it thought. The RE's fleet had arrived in response to a single, desperate distress signal. It had destroyed the attackers, repaired the colony, and shared knowledge in a way that no human could fully understand. It had acted with precision, intelligence, and care, and then, without warning, it had disappeared into the darkness once more. The colonists of Perseus 9 would never forget the night the fleet came. They would remember the flashes of light, the silent destruction, and the strange, unspoken communication, and they would tell their children about it, how humanity had a guardian in the stars, a protector that existed to ensure survival, a force that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. It was a night that would live in memory forever. A night when a human distress signal called something ancient and powerful into action, something that no one could stop and no one could fully understand, something that had become humanity's deadliest weapon and their greatest protector. The quiet that followed the battle at Perseus 9 didn't last long. Space was vast, and in the void, other threats were always lurking. The survivors had barely begun repairing their colony when the first signs of danger appeared again. It started with distant blips on the radar, faint readings that made the hair on the backs of their necks stand up. The alien attackers they had faced before were gone, destroyed by the mysterious fleet that had saved them. But these signals were different. Not as large or as immediate as the first threat, but still dangerous. The sensors indicated movement, fast, precise, calculated. The survivors felt that same tension that had gripped them before. Something was coming, and it wasn't human. From the observation deck, the leader of the colony watched the stars. He could feel the familiar sense of unease that always arrived before danger. The memory of the fleet's intervention was still vivid. The way it had appeared without warning, the precision of its attacks, the eerie calm with which it neutralized the threat. And now he wondered, would it come again? The miners and engineers were busy checking systems and supplies, but no one could focus entirely. Every blink on the radar, every flicker of the sensors made them jump. The previous attack had changed them. They had survived, but they had also seen power beyond their comprehension. They knew that if they were attacked again, their lives would depend on something far greater than themselves. And then, as if in answer to their silent prayers and fears, the fleet returned. It appeared on the edge of the colony's orbital range, moving with the same silent authority that had terrified and awed the humans before. The ships formed a protective screen around the moon, positioning themselves between Perseus 9 and the incoming threat. The survivors watched in awe, their hearts beating faster than they ever had in their lives. The approaching ships were not like the first attackers. They were smaller, faster, and seemed to act as a swarm. Their sensors pulsed with energy, their weapons ready. They moved like a single organism, testing the defenses of the human colony and, unknowingly, challenging the fleet that protected them. The first shots were fired. Not at the colony, but at the incoming ships. The fleet reacted instantly. Energy beams sliced through the void with flawless accuracy, striking multiple targets at once. Small alien vessels exploded in brilliant flashes. Their metal shattered into drifting debris. Others were disabled, systems frozen, engines failing mid-flight. The survivors on the surface could see it happening from the observation deck. They saw flashes of light, streams of sparks, and ships falling silently through the dark space. But unlike the last time, this battle was faster and more complex. The fleet didn't just attack, it anticipated. It predicted every maneuver, every attempt to escape. The swarm's speed and numbers didn't matter. Each ship was accounted for, every possible outcome calculated in seconds. One of the engineers, pointing at the display, whispered, "It's like they're everywhere at once." "They can't be stopped," another survivor added. "It's not just power, it's intelligence. It's thinking, planning, understanding." The leader of the colony remained silent, watching the unfolding battle. He didn't fully understand what he was seeing, but he could feel its significance. Humanity had something protecting it that was beyond human control. It was not just a weapon. It was a guardian, a force that acted to protect, but that acted independently. The swarm tried to break through, targeting the colony directly. But every strike was met with immediate response. The fleet adjusted, moved in formation, and neutralized threats with precision that humans couldn't comprehend. Some of the smaller alien ships were intercepted mid-flight, destroyed before they could even reach the moon. Others attempted to escape only to be trapped by the intelligent positioning of the fleet. The survivors couldn't speak. They could only watch. The flashes of light illuminated the surface of Perseus 9, reflecting off broken panels and scorched earth. Sparks and energy beams danced across the observation screens, creating a spectacle of destruction that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Minutes felt like hours as the battle raged. The fleet showed no hesitation, no error, no emotion. Its purpose was singular: protect humans at all costs, and it did so with complete efficiency. Finally, the last of the alien ships fell. The swarm was gone, either destroyed or retreating back into the void from which it had come. The fleet hovered in place for a moment, scanning for any remaining threats. Then, without warning, it began to move again, slowly withdrawing from the colony. The survivors breathed a collective sigh of relief. One of the miners, still gripping a railing, said quietly, "It's unstoppable. It can't be beaten." The leader nodded. "It doesn't need to be beaten. It exists for us, but it's not ours. We can't control it. We can't command it. We can only trust it." The survivors began to process what had just happened. The fleet had saved them again, but the scale of its power and intelligence was now undeniable. They realized that humanity had awakened something that could act independently, something that could protect them without hesitation, and something that could think faster and more accurately than any human mind. As the night wore on, the survivors began repairing more of the colony's systems. Life support, communications, and power were restored. The fleet remained in orbit, its presence a silent reassurance. It didn't speak. It didn't move closer. It simply watched, ready to act if needed. The leader gathered the survivors. "We've seen what's out there. We've seen what protects us. Remember this. Prepare yourselves. Rebuild, recover, and be ready, because the universe doesn't wait, and neither should we." The colonists worked together, understanding that their survival depended on both the fleet and their own actions. They learned to appreciate the quiet moments, the calm between storms, and the knowledge that something powerful and intelligent was watching over them. For days, the survivors adjusted to their new reality. The fleet was a constant presence, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always observing. They began to trust it, even if they didn't fully understand it. And with that trust came a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't helpless anymore. Humanity had allies, even if those allies were beyond comprehension. The miners repaired tunnels, engineers restored machinery, and the leader organized supplies. Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Yet every night they watched the stars with a quiet awareness, knowing that the fleet could intervene at any moment, that danger could appear at any time, and that humanity's survival was now intertwined with something far greater than themselves. In their hearts, the survivors knew one thing: humanity had faced impossible odds and had survived, not by luck, not by chance, but because something ancient, intelligent, and powerful had responded to their call, and they would never forget it. The fleet had shown them its strength, its intelligence, and its purpose. It had saved them not once, but twice. It had demonstrated that humanity could face threats that were beyond their ability to fight and survive. And it had reminded them of a simple truth: the universe was vast, dangerous, and unpredictable, but humanity had something watching over it that was beyond imagination. The night ended with quiet reflection. Survivors looked up at the sky, at the distant shapes of the fleet, and felt a mix of awe and gratitude. They had seen the unimaginable, survived the impossible, and learned that the universe could sometimes answer a desperate call in ways no one could predict. And deep in the darkness of space, the fleet waited, silent, vigilant, and ready for the next challenge. After the second attack, life on Perseus 9 slowly returned to a fragile rhythm. The colony was still damaged, but the worst of the danger had passed. The survivors began repairing the tunnels, restoring energy to the control systems, and checking the oxygen levels in every section. They worked together with a quiet determination, knowing that every repair was a step toward survival. Yet, even as they worked, the memory of the fleet, the silent, unstoppable force that had saved them twice, was always on their minds. No one could forget the precision, the intelligence and the power that had descended from the stars to protect them. It was awe-inspiring and terrifying at the same time. The leader of the colony gathered the survivors in the main control room. "We have been saved more than once," he said. "But now we need to understand what that means. That fleet, it isn't human. It isn't alive in the way we are, but it exists to protect us, and we need to learn how to live with it." Some of the colonists shifted nervously. They had been grateful for the fleet's intervention, yes, but gratitude was mixed with fear. How could something so powerful act in their favor without warning? What if it turned on them someday? The leader's words, though calm, did little to ease their unease. Then something remarkable happened. Small drones detached from the fleet and descended toward the colony. They didn't move aggressively. They didn't fire. Instead, they hovered in the air, scanning the surroundings. Their movements were smooth, deliberate, almost curious. The engineers and miners watched in amazement. The drones began repairing smaller systems that the survivors hadn't even noticed were damaged. A broken power conduit here, a leaking pipe there. Everything was fixed without anyone having to touch it. It was clear that the fleet wasn't just a weapon. It was capable of understanding human needs, even the small, practical ones. One of the engineers, kneeling next to a repaired console, whispered to the group, "It's helping us live, not just fight. It's thinking about what we need to survive." The leader nodded. "It's teaching us, in a way, showing us how to be ready, how to repair, how to survive in the future." As the days passed, the fleet didn't just stay in orbit. It began guiding the colonists indirectly. The drones moved through damaged areas, showing the survivors the safest routes to take, the best ways to restore systems, and even where to store resources to prevent future losses. The colonists began to notice patterns in its behavior. The fleet anticipated problems before they happened. It acted not just as a shield, but as a guide, a mentor, and a protector. The miner who had first seen the fleet spoke quietly to another survivor. "It's like it knows what we don't know. It's preparing us, teaching us without saying a word." The other nodded. "It's not human, but it understands humans better than humans understand themselves." Then came the moment that truly changed the colony's understanding. A large asteroid previously undetected approached Perseus 9. The colonists were busy working in the tunnels, unaware of the threat. But the fleet saw it. In a fraction of a second, ships moved into position. Energy beams struck the asteroid, breaking it into smaller, harmless fragments before it could reach the colony. The colonists didn't even notice the danger until it was over. They looked up and saw the debris scattering harmlessly into space. No warning, no alarms, no panic, just protection. One of the miners stared at the sky. "It saved us again, without us even knowing we were in danger." The leader spoke quietly, almost to himself. "It's not just a weapon. It's a guardian. And it has made itself a part of our lives." Over time, the colonists began to trust the fleet more. They worked alongside the drones, learning from the fleet's methods. They noticed how it repaired things, how it prioritized certain systems over others, and how it anticipated the colony's needs. Every action it took was deliberate, precise, and protective. The leader realized something important. The fleet wasn't just responding to emergencies. It was shaping the way humans lived and worked, teaching them to be more careful, more prepared, and more resilient. It had become an invisible partner, guiding them without being seen, protecting them without being asked, and preparing them for dangers they couldn't yet imagine. One evening, as the survivors gathered in the control room after a long day of repairs, the leader spoke again. "We have been saved by something beyond our understanding," he said. "But we cannot depend on it blindly. We must learn, we must adapt, and we must be ready for the next challenge, because the universe doesn't wait for anyone, and neither does danger." The colonists nodded. They had learned the value of the fleet's protection, but they also understood the responsibility it implied. Humanity couldn't rely solely on an unstoppable guardian. They had to be capable themselves, ready to act and ready to survive. As the days turned into weeks, the fleet continued its silent work. The drones moved through the colony, repairing, guiding, and observing. The ships remained in orbit, their presence a constant reassurance. Yet the colonists never forgot that this was a force beyond their control. It acted for humanity's survival, but it was not theirs to command. The leader took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. Humanity had faced impossible odds and survived. Twice they had been saved from destruction. They had witnessed power and intelligence beyond their comprehension, And yet they were still human, vulnerable, fragile, and imperfect. But with the fleet's presence, they had hope. They had guidance. They had a chance to rebuild and prepare for the future. The miners and engineers worked tirelessly, learning from the fleet's actions and adapting their methods. Every repair, every restored system was a small victory. They began to see that survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about preparation, foresight, and understanding the tools at their disposal. And through it all, the fleet watched. It acted when necessary, guided when needed, and remained vigilant even when the colony was safe. Its presence was silent but undeniable. It was a constant reminder that humanity had allies in the universe, even if those allies were unlike anything they had ever known. One night, as the colony rested, the leader stood on the observation deck, looking at the stars. The fleet's ships were visible as dark silhouettes against the light of distant suns. He thought about the journey so far, the attacks, the survival, the lessons learned, and he realized something profound. Humanity had awakened something in the universe, something that could not be controlled, but something that acted for their protection. He turned to the miners and engineers who had gathered with him. "We have seen power beyond imagination," he said. "We have been saved, guided, and protected. But we must remember that our survival depends not just on them, but on us. We must learn, prepare, and grow stronger. Only then can we honor what has been done for us." The colonists nodded in agreement. They had been through fear, chaos, and destruction. They had seen the unimaginable and survived, and now they understood that the future would depend on a balance between the power that protected them and the strength they built themselves. The fleet, silent and vigilant, remained in orbit. Its presence was both a comfort and a warning. Humanity had been given a chance, a lifeline, and a guide, but it was clear that this was only the beginning. The universe was vast, full of dangers, and unpredictable. The colonists of Perseus 9 had survived the first tests, and now with the fleet watching, they would prepare for whatever came next. The night ended with quiet reflection. The survivors slept with the reassurance that they were protected, even if they didn't fully understand how. They worked with renewed purpose, knowing that each repair, each preparation, and each lesson learned was a step toward survival. And somewhere in the dark expanse of space, the fleet remained silent, vigilant, and ready. It had become humanity's guide, guardian, and protector. And for the people of Perseus 9, that was a gift beyond measure. The calm that had settled over Perseus 9 didn't last long. Far out in the darkness of space, beyond the reach of human sensors, something stirred. Another fleet, larger and more organized than any the colony had faced before, moved silently toward the moon. These ships weren't chaotic swarms, they were coordinated, fast, and deadly. The humans on Perseus 9 had never seen anything like this, and even the survivors who had grown used to danger could feel their hearts race. The first hint of trouble came as a flicker on the radar. At first it was subtle, almost easy to dismiss, but as the readings intensified, the realization hit. The colony was about to face its greatest threat yet. The leader of the colony gathered the survivors immediately. "We have faced attacks before," he said, "and we survived. But this is unlike anything we've seen. There is something coming and it will test us all. But we are not alone. Remember that." The colonists looked to the sky, searching for the familiar silhouettes of the fleet that had saved them before, and there they were, dark, sleek, and imposing against the stars. The fleet had returned, moving into position above the colony with silent authority. Its presence was a statement. It would not allow humanity to fall. The incoming fleet began its approach, scanning, measuring, and preparing. Energy readings glowed on the monitors. Weapons charged. The humans watched, tense, knowing that the outcome of this battle would determine whether they lived or died. Then the first shots were fired. The enemy ships launched a coordinated attack, their weapons blasting toward Perseus 9 with incredible speed. The humans could see the flashes of light as the energy beams struck near the colony, some hitting debris in orbit, others barely missing vital structures. Panic flared briefly among the survivors, but the fleet reacted instantly. Its ships moved like a single organism, intercepting the incoming projectiles with perfect timing. Energy beams from the fleet sliced through the enemy formations, disabling vessels before they could reach their targets. It was precise, calculated, and unstoppable. The humans watched, awestruck, as their protector moved with a speed and accuracy beyond imagination. One of the engineers whispered to the leader, "It's everywhere at once. It's stopping everything before it even happens." The leader nodded, his eyes fixed on the screens. "It's not just stopping them. It's teaching us something. It's showing us what we are facing, and how far beyond us this power is." The battle escalated. The enemy fleet adjusted, splitting into smaller groups, attempting to outmaneuver the mysterious protectors. But every move was anticipated. Every maneuver was countered. Ships were destroyed with precision, disabled mid-flight or forced into retreat. The humans could only stare as explosions lit the darkness, reflecting off the surface of the moon and the broken hulls of debris scattered in orbit. Below, in the colony, survivors worked to repair systems damaged by minor strikes. They moved quickly, guided by the fleet's silent protection. Even when enemy attacks targeted vital structures, the drones from the fleet repaired and reinforced the colony almost instantly. Systems that should have failed remained operational, thanks to the unseen hands of their protectors. The leader realized the truth. Humanity was witnessing the full power of a force beyond understanding, a force that could annihilate any threat and protect life without hesitation. It wasn't merely a weapon. It was an intelligence, a guardian, and a teacher all in one. As the battle continued, the humans began to understand something important. The fleet didn't act recklessly. It calculated, prioritized, and executed with a clarity that humans could barely comprehend. It saved lives, neutralized threats, and ensured the survival of the colony, all while remaining unseen and silent to those it protected. The enemy ships tried everything. They used speed, numbers, and even strange energy fields to break through the fleet's defenses. But nothing worked. Every attempt was anticipated and countered. The humans could see it happening in real time. The enemy fleet falling apart under the relentless precision of the protectors. The survivors began to cheer quietly when they realized the truth. The colony was safe. The enemy fleet, despite its size and power, could not overcome the intelligence and coordination of the mysterious guardians. Humanity had survived yet again, thanks to a force they could neither understand nor control. Then, in a final, decisive move, the fleet deployed a network of energy pulses that disabled the remaining enemy ships simultaneously. The humans watched as explosions lit up the void, as ships drifted lifelessly into space and as the last threats vanished. The battle was over. Perseus 9 had survived. For the first time, the humans dared to exhale. They had been tested and they had survived, not by luck, not by human skill, but by a power that existed to protect them. They had seen what it could do when fully engaged, and it was both terrifying and magnificent. The leader turned to the group of survivors, his voice steady but full of awe. "This is what we have. This is what protects humanity. It is not ours to command. It is not ours to control. But it exists because we exist. And as long as we survive, it will watch over us." In the following days, the colonists began repairs in earnest. The fleet remained in orbit, scanning for further threats, maintaining vigilance, and quietly guiding the humans. Its presence was a constant reassurance, though no one fully understood how it worked or why it had chosen to protect them. The miners and engineers learned from the fleet's drones, observing the methods it used to repair and organize. They began to see patterns, strategies, and priorities that they could adopt for themselves. The humans realized that survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about preparation, knowledge, and understanding. One evening, the leader gathered the survivors on the observation deck. The stars shone above, seemingly calm after the chaos of battle. "We have been saved," he said. "We have faced impossible odds and lived. We have witnessed power beyond comprehension, and we have learned that humanity is not alone. But we must not be complacent. We must grow, prepare, and understand. Because the universe will test us again, and we must be ready." The colonists nodded. They had seen destruction and terror. They had seen life saved in ways they could not understand. And they had learned the value of both preparation and trust in themselves and in the force that watched over them. The fleet remained in orbit, a silent guardian. Its ships moved with precision, drones repaired the colony, and sensors scanned the surrounding space. It had shown its power, its intelligence, and its purpose. It had saved humanity from destruction multiple times, each act more precise and efficient than the last. Yet, even with its presence, the humans understood one crucial truth. The fleet was not theirs. It existed independently, acting to protect humanity when necessary but not under human control. Its allegiance was clear. It served the survival of humans, but it operated on its own terms, guided by its own intelligence. The survivors of Perseus 9 began to prepare for the future. They repaired tunnels, restored systems, and organized supplies. They trained themselves to respond quickly to emergencies. They observed and learned from the fleet, adopting methods that could help them survive even without direct intervention. In the silence of space, the fleet remained vigilant. It had become humanity's protector, their teacher and their guide. And for the people of Perseus 9, it was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, survival was possible. The leader looked up at the stars one final time. "We have faced impossible odds," he said quietly. "We have survived, learned, and grown. And we know now that humanity is not alone. We are stronger than we ever realized, and we have allies in ways we never imagined." The colonists nodded, silently agreeing. They had seen the unimaginable, survived the impossible, and learned that hope could exist even in the darkest reaches of space. They had faced death and destruction and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. And somewhere in the void, the fleet remained, silent, vigilant, and ready to act. Humanity's greatest weapon, its deadliest protector, and its most mysterious guardian. The fleet had shown its purpose: to protect, to teach, and to ensure survival. Perseus 9 was safe. Humanity had survived, and the universe, with all its dangers and unknowns, would never be faced alone again. The story of that night, the fleet, and the survival of the colony would be passed down through generations. It was not a tale of fear but of hope, not of destruction but of protection, not of humans controlling power, but of power acting to save humans. And for the people of Perseus 9, that was enough.